Hey, thanks for checking out this podcast. Our hope is that it's an encouragement to you, that it builds your faith, that it helps you be a better leader and a better influencer in and through your life. If this is helpful to you, we'd love you to subscribe and also share it with somebody else to encourage them too. Thanks. Hey, we would like to welcome you to today's podcast. Today we have Pastor Jeremy and myself, Pastor Dan, and we're excited to talk to you just about growing in your faith and continuing on your faith journey. So welcome everyone.
Absolutely. Today we're talking about how to be a disciple or how to be discipled. How do we be led in a way that we would grow and grow closer to Jesus? And so today's all about people you look up to, people you follow after, relationships you have, and how to have those well and effectively.
Yeah, it's awesome. And really every follower of Jesus in Scripture is called a disciple. Right? And the idea is that we are supposed to be disciples, and we're supposed to be disciple makers.
Absolutely.
So that's the Christian journey, is we help other people become disciples, and we be disciples ourselves. And so we're talking about that journey, and then in particular, we're saying, because you could go 100 directions there, right?
There are lots of topics on this.
Christian life, so we go everywhere. So we're going specific as to
real specific.
How do you get discipled by someone else, or how do you find people in your life and navigate that discipleship journey with people who are going to help you grow in your faith?
Right. So, and before we dive into our three things, we want to clarify that our first discipleship relationship is between ourselves and Jesus.
Yes.
If the word disciple means wanting to follow after someone in the hopes of being like them, our first discipleship relationship is to Jesus.
Right.
This podcast, while it will help you in that, this podcast is about being discipled under another person.
Right.
Or people we look up to be examples to us. Happens all the time in Scripture. And God commands us to go and make disciples. A big piece of that discipleship journey is being discipled ourselves by other people.
Yeah. So discipleship goes inward, right? It's me and Jesus, me being a discipled one under Jesus, growing in Him, getting to know Him better, all of that. That's the internal side of discipleship.
Right.
And then discipleship is external.
Yeah.
Right? It's people helping me grow, me helping other people grow.
Yeah.
It's relational in nature. It's individual in nature, and it's relational in nature.
Right.
It's
Absolutely.
Both. And so we're going to handle one area of the relational side.
Right.
Awesome.
And so today's podcast is all about how do you be a good disciple to others?
Right.
How do you follow after people well?
Yeah. We'd almost call that coming under someone
Coming under
else.
somebody.
Yeah. To learn, to grow, to develop.
Absolutely. And so the way I'm even framing it is, what are three things that I wished I knew 10 years ago or 5 years ago? What are some things I've found vital, and what are things you found vital over the last bunch of years in being discipled under people?
Right.
And so, the nature of it is you find somebody that's following after Jesus, who's further along on their path than you are, and you don't have to be just like them. They're going to have a different personality, but you look at somebody and you think, man, this person does such and such a thing super well with the way they live. I want to learn how to do that. Whether it's how they treat other people, or their biblical knowledge, or just how they're a father or a husband or a wife or a daughter, or whatever person they are. You look at them and think, I want to be like them in this area or that area, so I want to be discipled by them. Right.
In fact, you could, by way of example, you could have someone who you were discipling them in some areas, and they were discipling you in some areas. But the goal is to find people in your world that are going to help you grow along your faith journey.
Absolutely. So we've got three things to share with you that are vital to being a good disciple. The first one is, be careful about your expectations.
Yes, sir.
So what should you expect from a person discipling you?
Well, try not to expect too much, because expectations are the mother of disappointment, right?
Yeah.
So whenever we put expectations on somebody else, we're just setting them up for failure, setting ourselves up for disappointment.
Right.
There's tension in that, and and that can cause all kinds of challenges.
So when you see somebody and you're like, man, I want to be discipled by them, I want them to mentor me, or I want them to influence me. Know that that person is a human.
Yes.
They're a person, and your first step should be, I'm going to go make friends with that person.
Right.
I want to meet them like I would anybody else.
Right.
I want to get to know them and learn their boundaries and respect their boundaries.
Yeah.
Communicate clearly. Hey, would you like to meet every once in a while?
Yeah.
That sentence does not mean meeting every week.
Right.
That sentence means meeting once in a while.
Yeah.
If you say, hey, would you like to meet once every 2 months? There you go. Yeah. You're figuring out boundaries and expectations.
Yeah, you're working that out.
Work it out.
And as you enter into any kind of relationship, really,
right,
you can only control your side of it anyway.
Exactly.
So you don't go in going, well, they better this, or this.
Yeah,
you just go in going, well, I would like things. The way to do it is to say, I have desires, not expectations.
Right. I'd like to learn from you.
Totally.
But I don't know what your life looks like.
Right.
And I don't know if our personalities even click. But, let's get to know each other and see where that goes.
Yeah.
When I was growing up, when I first became a Christian, I was like, man, when I tell you, with my youth leaders, I looked at them and I did not think even twice about what their life was like. I just thought, I want to be just like them,
right.
and they've got to spend all their time with me. Like, let's meet once a week. Let's do this. Let's do that.
They're going to pour into me, and
and I had all these
amazing
expectations, and by the grace of God, they were very gracious to me.
Sure.
And did invest time into me.
Yeah.
But over time, as I became an adult, I would look back and think, I took them for granted. Like,
right,
I had so much high expectations on them.
Yeah.
And I should have been more thoughtful and less selfish. I was very self-absorbed at the time.
And you don't appreciate it if it's an expectation, because this is the difference between a desire and an expectation. With a desire, if somebody fulfills that for you, they've blessed you.
Right.
With an expectation, if somebody fulfills that for you, they've only given you what they owe.
Right.
Or what you perceive they owe.
Right.
And so they've just done what they should have done.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
So between my wife and I, if I'm doing the dishes at home, and she expects me to do the dishes,
right.
I finish the dishes, I don't get a pat on the back, I don't get an attaboy, I don't get a you're so amazing, right? Because I just did what was expected of me, for crying out loud.
Right.
But if she desires me to do the dishes but doesn't expect me to, and I do the dishes, man, she's all over that. She's like, that was awesome, thank you so much, right? So that's how we have to manage our own hearts move our expectations over to desires so that we can relate well and appreciate the blessings.
Be thoughtful about the person that you want to mentor you.
Yes.
And be open-handed with what comes out of it.
Yes.
Talk to them like you would anybody else. And decide and communicate. Like, hey, I would love to learn about how you live your life as a father. Right. So like you and I don't, like we have, you mentor me in a bunch of areas, but we don't meet on a regular basis. We just kind of we live around each other.
It happens organically in our lives.
Down the hall, and I just learn stuff from you as I go. And what I don't do is expect you to meet with me every 2 days or anything like that. Like my expectations of you are, you have a life and a full, we got a full load, things to do. And I'm going to be around you, but my expectations are very low in that I don't expect anything from you, but I do desire to learn from you. So whenever I get a chance, like this podcast, for example, I get to learn from you.
Yeah.
And so, I think that's a good example.
Yeah, and so having low expectations, high desires, however you want to say that, it doesn't mean you don't ask. Right. It doesn't mean you don't pursue. It doesn't mean you don't invite and engage. It just means that you do that with a heart that's very understanding and that's gracious.
Totally.
And it doesn't have a sort of, again, a blaming, you owe me attitude about it, right? It's sort of a worldview of how you approach life.
And another bit about expectations is, man, I had a professor in college, and I looked up to this guy so much. But our personalities didn't quite click, and so I ended up being really hurt because I didn't feel like he wanted to mentor me.
Right.
And I did have to manage my expectations from that point on and think, okay, I need to learn from this guy, but I don't think like a one-on-one mentorship relationship is going to be the deal. I'm just going to learn from him in class and based on study stuff. And then that kind of thing will pop up, and I think having healthy expectations at the get-go to not expect. A lot. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So once you could get over that, emotionally, mentally, once you got through that hurdle, he could still mentor you. You could still learn from him.
Exactly.
Not in the way you were originally thinking or expecting, but still in a valuable way. And you would have lost that had you just hung on to that your paradigm or your
My
model.
expectation, it has to look like this.
Exactly. Yep.
So number one is manage your expectations of the human being you want to learn from.
Yes.
And they're not perfect, right? Like no one that you look at is going to be perfect. And so you can't look at someone and say, I want to be just like that person in every way. Maybe consciously pick some areas that you want to learn from that person in. That'll help with your expectations as well, I think.
That's great.
So number one, manage your expectations. What's number two?
Number two is be curious.
Be curious.
Right? Come with that curiosity, that wanting to learn, wanting to grow. I find this too. If I go into a mentoring relationship, somebody I'm trying to learn from, and I'm not in a hungry, humble, just wanting to learn mood, I can just shoot the breeze for an hour with them
and not learn anything. Right.
And in honesty, I'm wasting their time.
Oh.
Which I feel bad about sometimes.
Don't waste. If someone wants to meet with you and mentor you, go into it with a posture of open hands, like you want to learn from them.
Right.
That you want to hear the ideas they have. You want to spend most of the time asking and not most of the time sharing. Right. I think at the beginning of a mentorship relationship, you should share about yourself so they can get to know you.
For sure.
But man, a lot of, if not most, of your mentoring relationship should be that of asking questions.
Exactly.
What do you think about this? Is there ever a time in your life where you dealt with this? And honestly, if they have an eye for seeing you grow, they'll ask you the right questions. And they'll ask for you to share.
Totally. And you don't want to overload with information. Right? Sometimes it's just, we all love talking about ourselves. And we all love sharing our stories and our journeys and all of that, which is great to do. It's just that when you have somebody, an opportunity to learn from someone, you want to come ready to learn. And so you might want to offer them context, and in fact, you usually do, and share some of your journey and your story in bits and pieces. But you don't want to load up the conversation so much with your own opinions, ideas, and journeys and stories that there's no space for them to offer input. You want to create a vacuum for them to fill.
Right. There are spaces where you want to share with someone and find validation.
Yes.
But know with that expectation bit, you should go into it wanting to learn from that person.
So I'll just confess my sins here.
Sure.
My insecurities can sometimes get in my way here.
Okay.
So sometimes I'll meet with somebody that I'd love to learn from, but I want to. I'm focused so much on looking cool or being impressive or just not saying something stupid that I don't come curious enough. My focus isn't enough on the curiosity and on the learning. It's too much on just adapting to the time or making the time good, and I miss out when I do that. So what I've had to learn to do is push my insecurities aside and come just ready to learn and hungry to learn.
Yeah, and with that curiousness, it doesn't have to be in a sit-down meeting where you ask questions either.
Right.
With anyone you look up to,
yes,
you should have a curious spirit about asking good questions.
Right.
And so like, I'm sure I ask you tons of questions about like parenting stuff, or just a lots of times I'll pop into your office and ask you about Bible stuff. Like I'll be stuck on a sermon, or it's even a sermon I feel good about, but I want your insight. And so I'll just ask you a question. We don't have an official mentorship like meeting time. I ask you a question. I ask if you have a minute. I ask you a question. You give me some awesome stuff. I go away and deal with that. And I think just in general, I try to do that with people I look up to in general. I ask them stuff.
And I think by far the best learning in life happens along the way. Rather than in the classroom, if you will.
Oh man.
So it's as I'm wrestling with something.
Exactly.
If I can give somebody a call, a text, a pop over, and even write that down and be like, hey, I was wrestling with this because of this situation the other day. Now that I'm in my meeting with this person, I'm ready to ask this question because it came up. So it's during the course of life that we learn the most things.
I love how Jesus modeled it. So at the end of Matthew, he says, go therefore and make disciples of all nations. He has this big mandate to go and make disciples. And it wasn't until recently that I asked, how does Jesus want them to do that?
Right.
And then it just hit me like a brick. I'm like, well, he just showed them.
Yeah.
He walked with them for 3 years. He did life with these guys.
Right.
They went around and they learned by doing.
Right.
So they walked through life.
That's life on life, doing life together. You learn from each other. And that being said, that can happen in multiplied ways.
Totally.
So I might be mentored by somebody I've never met.
Right.
Simply by watching, observing how, like, so let's say I'm trying to learn to be a better communicator. So I'm a communicator. So I could watch their communication.
Right.
Read their online blog posts and read their emails or whatever.
Right.
And I would be learning, if I'm curious enough, from their communication. Or, you know, I always joke that it's not a joke, but I say it to get people surprised or whatever, that many of my best mentors are dead.
Yeah.
You know, and they've been dead since before I was born. They're people who lived centuries or decades ago.
Right.
And they've mentored me through their books and through their lives and through biographies about their lives.
Right.
So there's lots of ways we learn from others when we have that curious spirit.
Right. So the first one is manage your expectations well.
Yes.
The second one is to be curious.
Yeah.
And the third one is be what? I guess it would be...
We struggled to get a word for this, didn't we?
Yeah. So I'm going to say this as simply as I can. The third concept is actually do what they say.
Be ... Just actually do what they say.
Just actually do it. So I'm so guilty for this in my, since I was 14, through my early 20s, where I would get mentors and they would give me such rich advice, and then I'd go away, go home, and think, am I really built for that? I don't know. And then I don't even give it a chance.
Right.
They're like, hey, wake up at 6 a.m. every day for 30 days and see where it takes you. I'm like, one day, and I'm like, this is terrible. I'm not going to do that.
Right. Doesn't fit me.
Doesn't
it's not my
fit
personality.
me. It's not my thing.
Yeah.
And maybe it's not.
Right.
But man, your go-to should be, I'm going to try this out.
Yeah.
Like if I, this person I look up to.
Yeah.
Who, if I look up to them in this specific area and they give me advice, they've given you knowledge that they've lived out, and they've given you a key.
Right.
Man, use the key.
Right.
Do it. Actually try it.
Right.
Die to yourself a bit and wake up at 6 a.m. for 30 days and see where it goes. At the end of 30 days, if you say, it's not for me, it's not for you.
Yeah.
But man, if you go to the end of those 30 days and on the 28th day you're like, oh, I see what he means. I'm an early bird now. I can wake up in the morning, which still isn't me. But you would at least tried on the shoes and walked a mile.
Totally. So just to kind of, I don't know, give context to this. I think in our culture we're so individualistic.
Right.
And we're so opinionated, if that's the right word, or we're so concerned about being our own person.
Right.
In other cultures, and I've had the opportunity to do lots of ministry with various other cultures, it's amazing to watch how seriously people take the words of a mentor, discipler, leader.
Right.
Just like, wow, if you told me that, leader, then I'd be crazy not to at least give it a go.
Yeah.
And I think there's a balance.
Sure.
I think you do have a right to your own opinions,
of course,
and your own views, and you don't just do everything somebody else says.
But your rule of thumb.
Yeah, I just think in our culture, in our we tend to be too individualistic, too.
We take those things as suggestions.
Exactly.
And they get left in the suggestion box.
Yeah.
In the top of our bookshelf, collecting dust.
And then we just kind of go with this little you do you.
You do
right?
you. Yep.
Now, I'll just do me, and I know that's your suggestion. I know that's your advice, but I'm
right.
And I think we miss out on a lot of growth and learning.
If 90% of the time you take seriously at least those suggestions and make them actionable, if 90 to 80 or 90% of the time you do them, you're going to grow.
Totally.
You're going to get the most out of those relationships. So if you're curious, right, that first bit where you're asking lots of questions, and that this bit of that you actually take those suggestions and act upon them, it's huge.
Yeah.
And so, man, when you find somebody, let's say somebody that's really good at carpentry, they say, if you I don't know anything about carpentry, but let's say we're talking about like beveling edges.
Sure.
Bevel 30 edges of this scrap wood here, and you're going to get really good at beveling edges.
Right.
And then you just don't.
Right. You're like,
well, what was the point of asking the question if you weren't going to do anything about it?
Totally.
It's like when you ask your friend, should I go with green or blue? And they say, go with blue. And you're like, nah, I'm gonna do green.
Totally.
It's like, well, why did you ask?
Totally.
So when you're meeting with a mentor and they are trying to give you strategies to grow,
right?
Man, try out the strategies.
Right. You're genuinely looking for advice, not just for somebody to affirm what you've already decided.
Oh,
right? And that's
I get guilty of that so many times. I'll ask my wife, what do you think about this? And she'll go, do this. And I'm like, nah.
Yeah.
I'm the worst at it. And it's so true in discipleship relationships that we need to just act upon the suggestions or that hopefully if you have somebody that's invested time into you and they've thoughtfully said, like, maybe try this, try that.
So one of my favorite pieces of advice I've heard about how a regular discipleship or a regular mentoring meeting is when you come to the next meeting, come to tell your discipler, your mentor, about one way that you applied what they taught you last time. So you're like, hey, how you doing? Good. How are you? Good. And then you say, oh, you know what you shared with me last time? I did this and this and this with that. Thanks so much. Or that helped. Or I found this part of it useful. Blah, blah, blah. And I'll tell you that it triggers something in both people, right? It's encouraging to the mentor, like, oh, you actually do this. Ooh, I better think about what I say and make sure it's helpful. But it also triggers something in you that you go, and I'm listening in such a way that I'm thinking
that
about
in a sense
this being
is some
actionable.
affirmation that you might be looking for, and that your efforts are leading towards something tangible.
Totally.
That's awesome.
I love it.
Yeah, and so those are 3 quick ways that you can look at the relationships you have in terms of people that influence you and make them effective. And so the first one is manage your expectations. Realize that they're human with boundaries, with lives and capacities, and have grace for them.
Right.
2 is be curious. Go to whoever you look up to with questions about how they got good at what they're good at, or how did you get so wise in this area, or and you'll be surprised what you learn when you come in with a curious heart. And the third one is just do the thing. Do the thing. Do what they suggest you to do, within reason, obviously. Like, you might get some guy who suggests something crazy, but, within reason, take the suggestions of a wise person that you've decided to go under and learn from. So those are our 3 things.
Super helpful. And I hope that's a blessing to everybody who joins in on today's podcast.
Awesome. Next week, we're going to talk all about how to make disciples and be a good disciple.
Right. So we'll turn it the other direction.
Pivot. Yeah. Awesome. Cool. Have a great week, everybody.
Awesome.